Chevy Optra, having a clutch issue. It has a hydraulic clutch. The clutch pedal has zero feel to it, and if we can get some light in here, yeah, it just pushes down to the floor and stays down. There's no resistance except for the spring that I'm pushing on it. So we're going to try to find out here what the deal is, what's going on. It's my first time using this jack from Princess Auto this afternoon, and there we have it. Lifts this pretty easy, not that that's saying much because the car only weighs about 15 pounds. I give a quick stomp on them there, snap it loose, leave the car on the ground, because if you lift the front of it up while you're trying to break them loose, it's just going to spin. I'm going to take some silver spray paint. I'm going to take real quick and spray it on over here, because I'm going to have this apart, and I'm going to want to know where it goes to put it back together so that I don't change the alignment too much. You might also be able to tell that I've never used these wrench things or a ratchet before. Now, I'm sure in some book somewhere it tells you that you got to take this axle nut off. I'm hoping that I'm not going to have to do that, and I'll show you how I do it. As you can see, I got this bolt out. I'm not going to take that all the way out because it probably will help to have that in when I go to take out this bolt. And I see Chev is actually quite nice, and they used a pinch in there instead of a taper fit. So this might come apart really easy. So it's not just going to fall out for me. It's actually going to take quite a bit of force. So what I'm going to do to make my life easier, I'm going to take these bolts here and here out of the brake caliper, and then I'll be able to get the caliper out of the way. Looks like caliper bolts are going to come out hard all the way. Let's see. Oh no, there's blue Loctite on there. A little note here, if you don't take the bottom bolt out all the way, that'll allow you to take the top bolt out without the caliper swinging around. I found that out. But without the bottom bolt in, this caliper bracket just wants to swing out, as I'll show you now, because this bolt is loose. So yeah, this whole thing will just try to swing up. There we have it. I put a tie wrap through the bolt around the brake line, the hard line at the top. Now I've got this nice easy bend here, and I've got access to the pinch bolt that I was trying to get at. So I got it broke loose. It took quite a bit of force to break it loose, so it was necessary to leave these bolts in here until this one on the bottom was broke loose. Otherwise, the whole assembly here would just be flopping around and causing issues. So I'm going to have to get maybe a hammer and a punch and hit that bolt out. Okay, so that bolt is now out, and so this should come apart fairly easily. Gave this a few taps, and tapping it, you can see that this part has actually gone down a little bit. Give a few more taps. See, it's dropped down in that hole. So what I'm going to do now is take those bolts out, because this has rubber bushings in there and it's going to want to spring upwards, which is going to make it really hard to knock this down out of the way. So I take these out, and I can probably pull that knuckle up off there. Okay, so it took two hands. I got that off. Ball joint feels okay. And it's hard to see, but see if I can pull that axle out of the transmission. Now when I do that, I'm going to lose transmission fluid, oil, And so I've got a drain pan under here. Depending on what type it is, it may pop out of the transmission. It may also pop apart inside of the boot, or it might pull the boot off or rip the boot. So not a good idea to do that. I've always found that with these joints and pulling them out of the transmission, a quick snap works a whole lot better than prying on them or pushing on them. They seem to take an incredible amount of force if you're just pushing on them, but a quick snap is all that it took with a little pry bar, and it popped out. The proper way to do it would have been to remove this tie rod end from the knuckle a few steps ago. It would have been one of the first things to do once you take off the wheel, actually, because it's holding the knuckle on now, and because none of the other bolts are in and the knuckle's just flopping around with the axle hanging part way out, it's going to be a little bit tricky. This one is a taper fit. It takes a good solid snap or a special puller to take them out. I'm just going to give it a quick snap. Now there's two ways to do this. One, you can try hitting on the end of the nut here. You don't want to damage the threads, so thread the nut on quite a ways, but don't leave the threads on the bolt exposed. The other way to do this, which works most of the time, is to actually hit sideways on the knuckle. Okay, so I got it to come a little bit, but now the problem is the nut doesn't want to come off, and the ball joint will just turn in the end of the tie rod. So this is how I actually went about doing this. I used a pair of channel locks to squeeze it back together, and now that I've got it squeezed back together, there's enough resistance so that the nut will thread off. Now that I've got the nut off, this should just fall apart quite easily. And there we go. Well, there we have it. That's the part that goes into the transmission. That little clip is all that holds it in there, and when you're trying to pry it out, it seems like there's a whole lot more sometimes, but that's all that holds it in there. You gotta be really careful not to damage this shaft, especially the seal surface, which is this lower part, or it will leak when you get it back together. You also have to be careful not to damage the seal when you're putting it back in or when you're taking it apart. There's a brake disc still on there, so we didn't have to take any of that apart. That's how you do that. Now I gotta figure out what I have to take apart to get the transmission out. So it's only been a few minutes. I've taken out a bolt here, here, here. Taken out this mount bolt and loosened off the back one so the mount swings down out of the way. And yeah, that's my progress. And I just dripped oil on my camera. So I've taken all the bolts out of the transmission. Got a jack supporting the end of the transmission, or underneath the transmission, so that it doesn't fall out. What's going to happen, the engine is going to drop. So what I need to do is either tie the engine up in some way or block it up in some way. I got the transmission a little closer to being out. The linkage for the shifting is holding me back, and a couple other wires and things. I'm not really sure what to do with the linkage. I'll try to let you know when I find out. So there was a whole lot of fighting. In the end, I had to take a clip out from underneath this linkage thing. I probably should have taken one out of here when I started. But anyway, it's out, and from the mess in here, you can determine that it is indeed a problem with the slave cylinder throwout bearing assembly. So we'll be replacing that and putting it back together.